Okay, good morning everyone and welcome. This is QueryClick's first webinar. So thank you all for taking time out to come and join us today. I've got a couple of colleagues along. Before I give them a chance to introduce themselves, let me just set the scene for us all. So this webinar is focused on the topic, is cookie-free attribution a myth? And we'll talk today about different thoughts on that, coming from the point of view of QueryClick's position and also experienced attribution modeling in Simon's case. So for my background, before I invite the others to chat, I'm the CEO and founder here at QueryClick. I've been working in digital marketing for the last 15, 16 years and just about 20 years working with web development. I helped build what became the largest independent search marketing agency in the world before founding QueryClick 14 years ago. We've been focused on serving enterprise customers. I think we have about £1 billion of client revenue under management. And now, just 8 years ago today, we began developing what became our Kavvadias product, which is an attribution product. So that's me. Joe, if I can ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Joe Kavvadias. I'm part of the team here, mainly focused on the client side of things in terms of being very involved with the onboarding and the active projects that we work on for Kavvadias.
Thank you very much, Joe. Simon, could you introduce yourself as well?
Good morning. I'm Simon. I'm product lead at QueryClick. I manage the research and development work of our attribution solution. I've been in software since my dad taught me MS-DOS when I was 6, and I've been in marketing since my first development client asked me, why doesn't my website show up in Google?
That's a question we've all asked ourselves at some point. That's great. So thanks, gents. I'll set the scene a little bit. There's a slide here that I'd like to share, which is from the a recent survey that we ran in partnership with Censuswide, published those results in January. That was a survey across 154 marketers with more than £5 million of digital media spend under management. And there was a strong focus. Bear in mind, this survey would have gone out around November time. There was a really strong focus on third-party cookies and the impact that would have on the marketing stack. And a big part of the sort of proposed solutions, as you can see from the statistic, revolved around attribution. So I just want to dig a little bit into that and into why attribution is seen as a solution for the loss of third-party cookies. And I should say, for anyone who's not sure about what a cookie is, let alone a third-party cookie, a cookie is a text file that sits in your user agent, which is the application you're using to access the internet, and it stores an ID, and that ID is used to identify you if you return. And a third-party cookie is one that is set by a website other than the one that you are currently on. Now, there are a range of issues with third-party cookies from a privacy point of view, which is why they are under so much scrutiny. The way they're used predominantly, we'll mostly all be familiar with this. It's from a retargeting point of view. So if you want to serve an ad to someone, that cookie might be used to identify if you're the right kind of person to see that ad. And also sometimes from a prospecting point of view to develop lookalike audiences. Cookies are also heavily used to identify those audiences. So it's a critical part really of our MarTech stack, but there are a range of issues facing marketers. Now, clearly, Chrome, which is owned by Google, which is owned by Alphabet, Chrome is phasing out third-party cookies entirely through the course of this year, so they will largely be gone. They own about 60% of the user agent market share for context. They proposed a couple of weeks ago their Topics API as a replacement for that. Topics actually has a few limitations. There are about 300 topics that Google has proposed. So to give an example of how that might be limiting, if you're selling specialty coffee, the closest topic to that is not, as you might expect, specialty coffee. It's not even coffee. It's food and drink. That's the closest topic that you would have available to bid against, which I think we can all agree is not terribly granular data. The other flip side of that is, Chrome is 60% of the market. The other 40% largely are already blocking third-party cookies. So that means that today, your ability to target effectively is already pretty severely hampered. And finally, I think the last point I'd make about third-party before we get into the nuts of why attribution is a solution, there is a significant lack of incrementality to performance for third-party data. So there was a very well publicized study in 2019 that demonstrated that to get any incrementality at all from third-party targeting data, you would need to spend about 2.5 times the cost of a display image ad and about 1.5 times the cost of a video ad. So that really suggests that it's only the most premium inventory that's actually performing for us as marketers. And the vast majority of that third-party data really is ineffective. So it's low quality inventory, kind of junky, really. So you might argue that moving away from third-party data is a good thing that we should all be embracing, regardless of privacy considerations. So why is attribution seen as a solution there? Why do we get such a strong result in this survey? Most of the marketers that I speak to describe attribution as a solution because it allows them to have a baseline against which individual ad campaigns can be measured. Now, they might be hoping normally to do that with a kind of A/B test or a multivariate test, or even a media mix modeling test as well. We'll maybe come back to that and how attribution can play a really strong role in there. But before we do that, I want to get into attribution a little bit. I'm pretty sure that the majority of people that have come into this webinar will have experienced, trying to apply some level of attribution beyond our standard last click defaults that are provided to us in either our analytics package or in our ad tech reports, and have struggled to get good insight from that when it's taken action on, delivers what's expected. Attribution is something that I think has been frustrating for us all as marketers over the last decade in particular. And I think saturation of spends that are very concerning for the majority of paid media marketers in particular has made, I think, attribution something that is a particularly painful problem. And without a solution in there, it's very hard to see how that might be helpfully solved. So if I can ask for the next slide to be put up, I'll set the scene and then I'll pass over to the bigger brain in this session in Simon. Attribution and providing a good solution to attribution typically requires a good baseline of data. The insight that we came to at QC nearly 8 years ago now was that actually the data we get from Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, pretty much all analytics packages that are using a first-party pixel and a first-party cookie, so a cookie set by the website you're on, and that cookie is being used for the same reason, which is to set an ID, and when it's seen, that will stitch the next pixel hit into that journey. That seems to only produce data that's correct, the visit data, that's the stitched together data, about 20% of the time. We found that very early on in this study. You can see with working with Tesco data at the time, looking at about £16 million of revenue, just digital revenue being spent. And early experimentation with the use of machine learning and AI to try and improve that, we were able to achieve at that time about 85% accuracy. And actually today we're way up beyond sort of 95% accuracy plus. So I suppose the big question is, how is that? How is AI able to deliver that? So Simon, if I could ask you maybe to talk to us a little bit about AI and how we're able to deliver really good predictive accuracy there.
Thanks, Chris. It is quite an involved subject, as you point out, so I'll try to be brief. So the central piece of logic that sits in the middle of our solution is the hub. In place of cookies, Kavvadias relies solely on clickstream data, as Chris points out, collected by our pixel. Clickstream data, for those who don't already know, is made up of the moments where a customer either visits your website or views your advertising, so the digital piece of the interaction, like loading a page or loading an ad. For each user, we join the clickstream events to a hub in the QC vernacular, which is actually just a common location for a single user that connects together the multitude of devices and locations you would expect to see in a normal like research and purchasing experience. Cross-device understanding is obviously somewhere the cookies fail us, but using raw clickstream data and rebuilding that journey around the hub solves the cross-device and cross-location problems. So these comprehensive paths that we create using the rebuilding process containing all of the touch points for all of the devices in a user journey are taken and processed by our proprietary AI models, which I won't talk about too deeply for obvious reasons. We essentially stuff this data volume into a hungry neural network that builds a matrix out of the paths, and it traces every route through the complicated network to either purchase or to fall off. It uses the intersection between journeys to generate weights, which is translated as how much an event has influenced the outcome. So how much a marketing touch point has been, how effective it's been in driving users towards conversion. This is obviously in contrast to traditional heuristic models, which assert value to the entire journey before you even have usage data, like the standard first click, last click, or U-shape models you might already be familiar with. And because of that, we can accurately generate insight at a very granular level for things like campaign, ad creative, and keyword, which are either not available or not accurate using aggregated approaches. The accuracy at which our models predict the outcome of a journey, so how well the model can guess between a converting and a non-converting visit, is used to continually assess its predictive accuracy. When a model's accuracy falls out of the very tight acceptable range that we have set, it's then retrained until it predicts within this predefined range. And this training and retraining, importantly, is done on a client-by-client basis. So in a very robotic way, the neural network, it really understands our customers and continues to develop its understanding over time. So then finally, for presentation, we aggregate this data as late as we possibly can in our pipeline, which allows us to provide insight at the moments where clients actually have agency and influence, namely in their advertising and marketing activity. Aggregating so late in processing is unfortunately sort of, on one side, it's vastly superior in predictive accuracy, up to, as Chris mentioned, about 95%, but it adds substantial overhead in both assessment and computing resource. But I think Joe can probably talk us through some of the use cases about how this extra effort can be transformative in an approach to marketing spend.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I was about to ask that. I mean, I think I managed, probably like most of the audience, to understand about half of that. And there's probably a follow-up webinar where we deep dive into that further. Just before I ask Joe to answer your question there, I will say there is a Q&A function here, so please do feel free to drop questions in. If we don't manage to cover them in the webinar, we'll follow up and make sure that there's question coverage in outreach afterwards. So Joe, to that question, assuming you've got a really good accurate attribution, what's the commercial value of that? What's the actual impact that customers should expect?
Yeah, so in terms of actual impact, Chris, it really revolves for us around delivering accuracy and a fast time to value in terms of what we can represent with Kavvadias. And that for us starts with focusing on those main areas of digital spend, so what we call the essential deployment. And the essential deployment for us is focusing on Facebook and Google. And this slide that is currently showing, this basically shows some of the growth opportunities that we were able to identify on a recent campaign. And essentially within the project, what we're able to understand by looking at this data is where we can pick up on quick wins in terms of reallocating budget from underperforming campaigns to be able to produce much stronger growth opportunities. And an example of this is what we've done here by reallocating £2,000 worth of spend. We actually produced 14 times ROAS on that. And that was just by identifying wasted spend, identifying areas where we could reallocate that to drive much higher ROAS and ultimately growth. And that's really what we look to do with Kavvadias, is to provide that time to value as swiftly as possible. Another key thing here is that we highlight where, reporting tools like Facebook are dramatically over-reporting. In this example, you can see that Facebook is over-reporting by about 250%. Yeah. So it's drastic, and it's something that I imagine a lot of you have seen before. But when you look at the impacts across time, it has a very big impact on revenue and obviously the way that ad spend is being allocated into the right areas. So what we like to do is provide a very light touch onboarding process. It's a very simple technical deployment that can typically be done within 48 hours. And then during the onboarding phase itself, we then look to obviously ensure that we are ingesting data correctly. And then we focus on that essential deployment. So focusing on Facebook and Google, and within 30 to 45 days, we can produce very strong actionable insights that you guys can take action on, that will ultimately produce strong growth opportunities like the ones that we're showing here. So that's just a real sort of small scale example of some of the impacts that we're having with Kavvadias right now. Obviously aware that we've only got a few minutes left. So I'd love to be able to potentially take a few of the questions that have come in. Just taking a look here. Okay, so we've had a few questions come in. I'm just going to pick probably the first two, seeing as we've got a few minutes left here. And just waiting for the Q&A part to load.
I feel like we should have the countdown clock sort of ticking away.
Yeah. So I think the Q&A sections.
I've got a note here of the Q&A. So I've got one in here which might be for me. So maybe I'm going to pick one that actually might be better answered by you, Joe. There's one here which is, how do you solve the attribution problem when it comes to getting agreement across finance and marketing? So I think it's a little bit more about the idea that part of the acceptance of attribution is that what the data you have been using has been wrong the whole time, I guess. So Joe, would you be able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so ultimately, in terms of how do we get agreement across those different teams, marketing, finance, I think the key thing is that Kavvadias is going to be able to provide very accurate, actionable insights that everyone can interpret quite easily through the dashboarding, in terms of being able to see from a marketer's perspective where those opportunities are and where you can make decisions to improve, that ROAS and deliver that ROI that we've spoken about on the previous slides. But from a finance team's perspective, for example, we also provide out-of-the-box visualizations through Power BI. You can share those with, for example, your finance team, like a lot of our clients do, and it gives them very quick, high-level snapshots of exactly how Kavvadias is performing in terms of what is Kavvadias delivering, month on month, in terms of opportunities, and what's the ROI against the cost of Kavvadias. And typically, of course, the ROI is very strong, and it's typically double-digit for projects that we work on.
Thank you, Joe. I can see we've got another few questions in here, but we are just about bang on time. So, I mean, that tells me we need to do another one of these, give a bit more time to Q&A. We will follow up on some. There's a question there about comparison to media mix modeling, and how attribution plays into that. There's questions about EU regulations and data privacy, which I think we could probably dedicate a whole webinar to, because there are some significant advantages. And also, in light of Google's announcement yesterday that their privacy sandbox was due to be rolled out across Android devices over the next couple of years. So everyone who was impacted by iOS 14.5, particularly Facebook being most heavily impacted there, lost something like $10 billion in revenue. That is now happening to the majority of the mobile marketplace. So Facebook unlikely to be terribly happy over the next couple of years. So I think we'll put a pin in those. We're at time, and I'm conscious everyone's probably got a very busy Thursday. So I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who has attended. We'll maybe send out some notes on those questions to give as much value as possible. I just want to thank Joe and Simon for taking time to be part of this webinar. Hopefully it was useful for everyone who's dialed in. Do let us know and let us know if there's topics you'd like to be covered by the team. This is very much the first of a series that we're planning, and we're delighted to be able to share some insights with you all today. So have a great day, enjoy yourself. You can see a QR code there for downloading the report we mentioned. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.